Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to confront a terrifying reality that completely shatters the fragile, psychological fortress you have meticulously built around your own existence. As we delve into the chilling, reality-breaking implications of CERN's antimatter truck, transporting the void, we move through our incredibly brief, fleeting biological lives, heavily insulated by a profound, almost comical level of arrogance regarding the nature of the physical universe. You wake up every single morning and plant your bare feet onto the floorboards, completely, blindly trusting the physical integrity of the wood beneath you. You look into the mirror and you see a dense, solid, permanent biological organism staring back. You lean your weight against a concrete wall, you drive a heavy steel vehicle down a paved highway, and you instinctively believe that the macroscopic world is a stable, unyielding theater. This deeply ingrained assumption of solidity is the absolute foundation of human sanity. If we did not inherently believe that the ground beneath us was permanent, we would be entirely paralyzed by the crushing, existential dread of our own precariousness. We treat physical matter as the absolute default state of the cosmos. We imagine the universe as a vast, empty warehouse, and matter as the permanent, indestructible furniture placed comfortably inside of it. We are so profoundly convinced of our own density, and the density of the macroscopic world around us, that we completely fail to realize that everything we see, everything we build, and everything we fundamentally are, is nothing more than a localized, highly unstable mathematical exception. The unyielding, cold reality of quantum mechanics explicitly dictates that the stability of the physical world is a macroscopic, biological lie. To understand the sheer, terrifying scale of this deception, we must violently strip away the comforting illusion of physical touch and peer directly into the microscopic, suffocating abyss of the atomic structure. You have never actually touched a single physical object in your entire life. When you press your hand against a solid oak table, the skin of your fingertips does not actually make physical contact with the wood. What you are experiencing, what your desperately hallucinating biological brain is interpreting as the sensation of solidity, is nothing more than the violent, invisible repulsion of electromagnetic fields. The negatively charged electron clouds of the atoms constituting your flesh are fiercely repelling the negatively charged electron clouds of the table's atoms. The physical sensation of pressure, the feeling of weight and texture, is just the resistance of these invisible force fields screaming against each other in the freezing dark. You are entirely hovering, suspended by a microscopic cushion of electromagnetic hostility. And if you were to bypass those repelling force fields and look at the actual physical matter itself, you would find almost absolutely nothing. The atom, the fundamental building block of your so-called solid reality, is an entity composed of 99.9999999% empty, terrifying space. If you were to take the dense nucleus of a single atom and enlarge it to the size of a marble, sitting exactly in the center of a massive, sprawling football stadium, the electrons would be microscopic, ghostly gnats buzzing frantically in the highest, furthest bleachers. The entirety of the stadium between the marble and the gnats is a complete, suffocating void. You are not a solid object. You are a sprawling, ghostly constellation of incredibly distant, microscopic points of localized energy, desperately bound together by the invisible, vibrating laws of quantum physics. Your flesh, your bones, the blood pumping through your veins, and the very planet you are standing on are staggeringly fragile. Matter is not a permanent fixture of reality. It is an incredibly precarious thermodynamic balancing act, a temporary glitch in the cosmic mathematics, hovering terrifyingly close to the edge of absolute deletion. For decades, the orthodox scientific establishment has understood this terrifying fragility, confining their reality-breaking experiments to the deeply controlled, heavily shielded subterranean tunnels of massive particle accelerators. Deep beneath the border of France and Switzerland, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, universally known as CERN, has spent billions of dollars and decades of human ingenuity violently smashing subatomic particles together at speeds approaching the absolute limit of light. They have been aggressively poking the freezing void, tearing open the fabric of space-time for microscopic fractions of a second to witness the raw, unedited mathematics of creation and destruction. In doing so, they have not only proven the terrifying emptiness of normal matter, but they have regularly conjured the fundamental negation of our existence. They have summoned antimatter. Antimatter is not a science fiction trope, and it is absolutely not a conventional explosive. It is the exact mathematical mirror image of reality, possessing a reversed electrical charge and a fundamental, unyielding hatred for our physical universe. It is the ultimate cosmic eraser. If normal matter is the fragile ink written on the ledger of the universe, antimatter is the blinding, destructive flash that permanently zeroes out the account. Because our world is made entirely of normal matter, the incredibly fragile nature of our existence is heavily protected by the sheer absence of this mirror substance. We survive solely because the void is empty. But humanity is fundamentally, biologically incapable of leaving the abyss alone. We are cursed with a reckless, insatiable curiosity that constantly drives us to poke the sleeping, reality-shattering monsters of the cosmos. The scientists at CERN are no longer satisfied with merely creating fleeting, microscopic flashes of the void inside the sterile, heavily armored vacuum tubes of the Large Hadron Collider. They are actively, terrifyingly threatening the macroscopic fragility of our world. In a display of staggering, unprecedented biological hubris, they are capturing this absolute, unyielding annihilation. They are meticulously caging the fundamental negation of physical reality inside a supercooled, heavily magnetized metallic containment field. And they are not leaving it safely buried in the subterranean bunker where it belongs. They are pulling the apocalypse up to the surface. They are loading this absolute mathematical deletion into a metal box, placing it onto the back of a standard, heavy-duty transport truck, and they are preparing to casually drive it down a human road. We are standing on the precipice of a completely new era of existential terror. We are taking the exact, unyielding mathematical mechanism that permanently deletes reality from existence, placing it on 18 rubber tires and taking it for a ride through the macroscopic world. The incredible arrogance required to look at the sprawling, empty void of the atomic structure to understand that our entire physical reality hangs by a microscopic, electromagnetic thread, and to then confidently drive a box of pure, concentrated annihilation through a populated facility is absolutely paralyzing. They are not merely transporting a dangerous chemical or a highly radioactive isotope. They are transporting the physical embodiment of non-existence. They have built a fragile, temporary thermodynamic cage to hold back the absolute destruction of the universe, and they are trusting that cage to survive the mundane, chaotic bumps and vibrations of a standard delivery route. This stability you feel, the solid ground you confidently walk upon, is a mathematical lie, and humanity is currently actively driving the mechanism of its own permanent erasure directly through the heart of that lie, completely blind to the terrifying reality that the apocalypse does not need to fall from the sky when we are arrogant enough to simply pack it into a metal box and drive it down the street. We look up at the night sky and arrogantly assume that the sprawling tapestry of galaxies, the swirling nebulas, and the burning stars are the intended masterpieces of a grand cosmic design. We view the existence of physical matter as the ultimate triumph of creation, a deliberate and beautifully orchestrated event that purposefully culminated in the agonizing biological hallucination we call human life. We desperately want to believe that the cold, dead stage of the universe was specifically constructed to host the grand, dramatic play of our consciousness. But when we forcefully strip away our deeply ingrained theological comforts, completely abandon our desperate need for a comforting narrative, and peer directly into the raw, unedited mathematics of the very first fraction of a second of existence, we are confronted with a truth so profoundly horrifying that it completely shatters the illusion of our own legitimacy. The unyielding laws of quantum mechanics and particle physics tell a story completely devoid of purpose, design, or intention. The universe did not want to create us. The universe did not want to create the Earth. The universe, fundamentally, mathematically, and structurally, was designed to be completely, utterly, and eternally empty. To understand the paralyzing scale of our own illegitimacy, we must travel back 13.8 billion years, plunging into the blinding, suffocating crucible of the Big Bang, to witness the exact moment the cosmos made the most catastrophic mathematical mistake in its entire history. In the absolute, unrecordable infancy of the cosmos, there were no stars, no planets, no biological meat machines to desperately assign meaning to the chaos, and absolutely no empty space. There was only a microscopic, infinitely dense, and unfathomably hot singularity of pure, unadulterated energy. When this singularity violently expanded, tearing open the very fabric of space-time itself, it unleashed a roaring, apocalyptic storm of thermodynamics that fundamentally forged the bedrock laws of physical reality. And the most sacred, unbreakable law established in that blinding, expanding inferno was the law of absolute, perfect mathematical symmetry. Physics dictates that energy cannot simply decide to become a single, isolated type of matter. When the blinding heat of the early universe began to cool and condense, forcing pure energy to crystallize into physical mass, the ledger of the cosmos demanded perfect equilibrium. For every single electron that violently ripped itself from the primordial fire, the universe was mathematically obligated to simultaneously create a positron, its exact oppositely charged antimatter twin. For every single proton that emerged from the boiling quantum soup, a heavy, destructive antiproton had to be born right alongside it. The mathematics of creation demand a perfect, unyielding, and completely hostile mirror image. This fundamental law of symmetry means that the Big Bang was absolutely not the triumphant, joyous birth of a physical, material universe. It was the immediate, violent ignition of a cosmic war of absolute, unyielding annihilation. The infant universe was completely, claustrophobically flooded with equal, perfectly balanced oceans of normal matter and antimatter. And because these two substances possess a fundamental, structural hatred for one another, they absolutely cannot coexist in the same geometric space. The exact microsecond a newly forged particle of normal matter touched its antimatter counterpart, they violently, permanently deleted each other from existence, instantly converting their entire physical mass back into a blinding flash of pure, sterile gamma radiation. The initial fraction of a second of the expanding universe was a roaring, apocalyptic slaughterhouse of subatomic proportions. Trillions upon trillions of particles and antiparticles were violently born from the cooling heat, only to instantly collide and completely eradicate one another in a chaotic, blinding frenzy of absolute mathematical deletion. According to the flawless, elegant mathematics of perfectly symmetrical physics, this subatomic war should have ended in a perfect, absolute, and entirely sterile stalemate. The normal matter and the antimatter should have completely, utterly destroyed each other until there was absolutely zero physical mass left anywhere in the entire expanding cosmos. The grand equation of the universe was mathematically supposed to zero itself out. The intended result of the Big Bang was a vast, sprawling, and eternally silent sea of cold, passive radiation. A universe completely devoid of atomic structure, completely devoid of heavy elements, completely devoid of solid ground, and absolutely, permanently devoid of the agonizing, thermodynamic anomaly we call biological life. The universe was fundamentally designed to be a silent, empty, and beautifully perfect tomb of pure light. But something went horrifyingly, inexplicably wrong in the dark. Deep within the blinding, violent chaos of that primordial annihilation event, a terrifying, microscopic glitch occurred. A fundamental flaw in the unyielding symmetry of the cosmos manifested, an error so unfathomably small, yet so profoundly catastrophic, that it completely altered the eternal destiny of the physical world. For reasons that the greatest theoretical physicists and the most advanced quantum supercomputers on Earth still cannot mathematically explain, the great cosmic ledger failed to balance. The perfect mirror cracked. For every 1 billion particles of antimatter that were forged in the fires of the Big Bang, the universe mistakenly produced exactly 1,000,000,001 particles of normal matter, one single extra particle of normal matter for every billion pairs of complete, absolute annihilation. That is the great cosmic mistake. That is the terrifying microscopic rounding error that completely derailed the intended emptiness of the void. As the roaring, apocalyptic war of annihilation raged on, the billion particles of antimatter violently collided with the billion particles of normal matter, completely erasing each other from the fabric of reality, just as the flawless mathematics of symmetry demanded. The universe was bathed in the blinding light of its own self-destruction. But when the flash of the great annihilation finally faded, and the universe expanded and cooled enough for the subatomic slaughter to permanently cease, the cosmos was not empty. The perfectly balanced equation had failed. Left behind in the cold, sprawling, expanding ruins of the early universe was that single, leftover, unaccounted-for particle of normal matter. A tiny, insignificant fraction of physical debris that somehow, against all mathematical odds, survived the greatest erasure in cosmic history. The psychological dread of this revelation is absolutely suffocating. and it violently dismantles every single comforting narrative you have ever constructed about your own worth. When you look up at the sprawling majesty of the Milky Way galaxy, when you feel the warmth of the sun on your biological skin, and when you look deep into the eyes of another hallucinating, conscious human being, you are not looking at the intended masterpiece of a grand design. You are looking at the leftover, unaccounted for mathematical garbage of a broken equation. Every single burning star, every single swirling galaxy, the heavy iron core of the Earth beneath your feet, and the incredibly complex, vibrating quantum architecture of your own conscious mind. Everything that has ever existed in the entire physical universe is constructed entirely from that microscopic, leftover fraction of a percent of normal matter that managed to survive the primordial slaughter simply because its executioner failed to spawn. We are the cosmic anomaly. We are the dirt swept under the rug of a broken mathematical ledger. We spend our entire, incredibly brief biological lives desperately searching for a profound, inherent meaning to our existence. We build towering philosophical frameworks, we write sprawling cultural epics, and we invent deeply entrenched religions to convince ourselves that we belong here, that the universe specifically prepared a warm, brightly lit place for us in the cold dark. But the antimatter asymmetry explicitly proves that we absolutely do not belong here. Our existence is entirely illegitimate. We are not the favored, chosen children of a loving cosmos. We are the agonizing, unintended consequence of a microscopic clerical error. If the universe had simply functioned correctly, if the flawless, beautiful mathematics of perfect symmetry had not inexplicably fractured in the first fraction of a second of time, the concept of you would have never even been a mathematical possibility. The void was supposed to be completely empty, and our very presence, our breathing lungs, and our beating hearts are a glaring physical violation of the intended cosmic order. And the most horrifying aspect of this cosmic mistake is the agonizing realization that the universe fundamentally despises anomalies. The cosmos does not tolerate imperfection. The unyielding laws of thermodynamics are constantly, relentlessly grinding away at the physical structures of our world, desperately trying to return the cosmos to a state of cold, empty equilibrium. We are a temporary glitch, a fleeting, highly localized biological infection in an otherwise sterile, empty room. The universe has been desperately trying to correct this mathematical rounding error for 13.8 billion years, violently tearing at the fragile bonds of our atomic structure, slowly burning out the nuclear fuel of the stars, and actively accelerating the expansion of the void to stretch our leftover matter into absolute, freezing nothingness. We are living on borrowed time, constructed entirely from borrowed, illegitimate materials, constantly surrounded by a universe that fundamentally regrets our creation. We are the survivors of a broken equation, a desperate, hallucinating mistake wandering blindly through a cold, expanding cosmos that is simply, patiently waiting for the inevitable moment when the mathematics finally correct themselves, and the fragile, anomalous illusion of our physical reality is permanently, violently erased from the ledger forever. To survive the agonizing, crushing weight of our own cosmic insignificance, human civilization has developed a highly effective, deeply entrenched psychological defense mechanism. We take the most terrifying, reality-breaking concepts of the physical universe and aggressively dilute them into digestible, macroscopic fiction. We write sprawling sci-fi epics, We render spectacular digital explosions on movie screens, and we comfortably categorize the fundamental horrors of astrophysics as mere plot devices. For decades, the concept of antimatter has been the ultimate victim of this arrogant cultural sanitization. We have been conditioned to view it as a glowing, exotic fuel for imaginary starships or a brightly colored, futuristic weapon wielded by fictional villains. We comfortably reduce it to a magical battery, completely blinding ourselves to the paralyzing, existential dread that this substance actually represents. Antimatter is absolutely not a science fiction trope, and it is most certainly not a conventional explosive. It is the exact, unyielding mathematical mirror image of physical reality. It is a fundamental, structural negation of your existence, possessing a reversed electrical charge and a blind, mathematical hatred for everything you have ever known, loved, or touched. To understand the true horror of what the scientists at CERN are casually loading onto a delivery truck, we must aggressively strip away the comforting illusions of pop culture and stare directly into the blinding, destructive face of the Antiproton. To comprehend the absolute terror of the mirror, we must first look at the fragile, temporary architecture of our own physical bodies. The biological meat machine that you proudly call yourself is entirely constructed from a vast, incredibly complex arrangement of normal matter. At the absolute bedrock of this structural hierarchy, deep within the suffocating void of the atom, sits the proton. The proton is the heavy, stable, positively charged anchor of our physical reality. It is the fundamental building block that dictates the identity of every single element in the universe. The number of protons determines whether an atom is the oxygen your lungs desperately crave, the iron carrying blood through your veins, or the solid carbon forming the rigid structure of your bones. The proton is the architect of the macroscopic illusion, but the flawless, unyielding laws of quantum symmetry dictate that for every piece of architecture, there must be an exact, corresponding mechanism of demolition. The antiproton is that mechanism. It is the physical manifestation of a negative integer in a cosmic equation that desperately wants to equal zero. An antiproton looks exactly like a normal proton. It possesses the exact same mass, and it obeys the exact same fundamental forces of quantum mechanics. But its electrical charge and the quantum spin of the subatomic quarks buried deep inside it are perfectly, flawlessly reversed. If you were to somehow observe an isolated universe made entirely of antimatter, it would look completely, terrifyingly normal. Antiprotons and positrons would bind together to form antihydrogen. Anti-stars would ignite in the dark, burning brightly and forging heavy anti-elements in their blinding cores. Anti-planets would form from the swirling dust, and theoretically, complex biological anti-organisms could evolve, look up at their anti-sky, and arrogantly assume that they were the intended masterpiece of creation. The mirror works perfectly in isolation, but our universe is not isolated. Our universe is heavily, illegally contaminated with the leftover, illegitimate, normal matter from the cosmic mistake of the Big Bang. And because the universe fundamentally despises anomalies, the relationship between normal matter and antimatter is not one of passive coexistence. It is a relationship of absolute, unyielding, and instantaneous mathematical intolerance. This brings us to the most horrifying, reality-breaking characteristic of the antiproton. It absolutely cannot be touched. Throughout the entirety of human history, our species has interacted with the physical world through the mechanics of containment and physical manipulation. When we discover a dangerous chemical, we pour it into a thick glass vial. When we harness the terrifying heat of nuclear fission, we bury the reacting cores beneath thousands of tons of dense concrete, lead, and swirling water. We inherently believe that if we build a wall thick enough, heavy enough, and solid enough, we can isolate ourselves from any threat the universe can possibly produce. But the antiproton completely eradicates the very concept of a physical wall. You cannot put antimatter in a glass jar because glass is made of normal matter. You cannot lock it inside a heavy steel vault because the steel itself is the enemy. The containment vessel is the trigger. The exact microsecond an antiproton drifts through the freezing vacuum and physically touches the electron cloud of a normal atom, the ultimate, unbreakable law of cosmic symmetry is violently enforced. When normal matter and antimatter collide, it does not create a fire. It does not create a chemical explosion. An explosion, even a massive, city-leveling thermonuclear detonation, is a profoundly inefficient, macroscopic event. In a nuclear blast, only a tiny, microscopic fraction of the actual physical mass is converted into energy. The vast majority of the atoms are simply violently pushed apart, rearranged, or shattered into heavy, radioactive isotopes. The physical building blocks of the bomb and the city it destroys still exist in the universe. They are merely relocated and chemically altered. But the interaction between a proton and an antiproton is not a chemical reaction. It is a fundamental, structural breach of reality itself. It is the exact, agonizing process of absolute deletion. At the precise, unrecordable moment of contact, the subatomic quarks inside the normal proton and the antiquarks inside the antiproton instantly recognize their perfect, symmetrical opposite. The mathematical equation violently balances itself. In a flash of unimaginable, blinding violence, both the normal matter and the antimatter are permanently, irreversibly unwritten from the ledger of the cosmos. They achieve 100% absolute mass-to-energy conversion. The physical structure, the geometric volume, and the fundamental quantum data of both particles are completely eradicated from the fabric of space-time, instantly transforming their entire combined mass into a blinding, lethal burst of pure, high-frequency gamma radiation. They do not burn, they do not shatter, they simply cease to be. The universe aggressively scrubs the anomaly from existence, leaving behind absolutely nothing but the searing, invisible light of their mutual destruction. Now, apply this horrifying physics to the macroscopic world we arrogantly inhabit. Imagine the absolute, paralyzing dread of a microscopic cloud of antiprotons escaping its artificial magnetic cage. The moment the magnetic field falters, the antiprotons do not simply drift harmlessly into the room. They violently crash into the normal matter surrounding them. If they touch the titanium walls of the containment vessel, the titanium is instantly deleted. If the vacuum seal cracks and the antiprotons touch the chaotic, swirling nitrogen and oxygen molecules of the Earth's atmosphere, the very air itself is mathematically eradicated in a blinding flash of gamma rays. And if, by some horrifying failure of engineering, a highly concentrated cloud of antimatter were to physically touch your biological human skin, the reality of your death would be infinitely more terrifying than any macroscopic injury. You would not bleed. You would not burn to ash. The incredibly complex, heavily entangled quantum architecture of the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms that constitute your flesh, your nervous system, and the physical anchor of your conscious mind would be mathematically subtracted from reality. The matter that makes up your ego would physically interact with the fundamental negation of its own existence. The annihilation would be instantaneous and absolute, a violent, blinding flash of pure radiation that perfectly erases the biological hallucination of your individuality. This is the sword of Damocles that the scientists at CERN are casually manipulating. They are not playing with a new type of explosive. They are artificially summoning the universe's ultimate deletion mechanism. They are reaching deep into the freezing, mathematical dark, pulling out the exact mirror image of our own physical fragility and trying to hold it still in a world made entirely of its enemy. It is a substance that fundamentally hates the air we breathe, the ground we walk on, and the biological cages we inhabit. It is the raw, unedited void made manifest, a terrifying subatomic ghost that cannot be touched, cannot be reasoned with, and only exists to violently, permanently balance the equation of a universe that never wanted us here in the first place. We have established the terrifying, unbreakable rule of cosmic symmetry. The exact microsecond an antiproton physically interacts with a normal atom, both particles are violently, permanently deleted from the fabric of reality in a blinding flash of pure gamma radiation. Antimatter fundamentally despises the physical world, and it absolutely cannot be contained by it. This presents the ultimate, reality-breaking paradox for the orthodox scientific establishment. If you cannot put it in a glass vial, if you cannot lock it inside a heavy steel vault, and if even the invisible, swirling atmospheric gases of the Earth act as an immediate, lethal trigger for absolute erasure, how do you capture it? How do you take the fundamental negation of your own existence and hold it still in a universe made entirely of its enemy? To solve this impossible, apocalyptic riddle, human engineering had to violently abandon the macroscopic illusion of solid walls. We could not use physical matter to build the cage. We had to reach deep into the mathematical architecture of the cosmos and construct a prison out of pure, invisible forces. We had to build a fortress made of nothing but electromagnetism and the absolute freezing void. This staggering monument to human hubris is known as the Penning Trap, and it is the exact, terrifying technology utilized by CERN in their incredibly dangerous base and PUMA experiments. The Penning Trap is not a box in any traditional biological sense of the word. It is a highly localized, fiercely artificial manipulation of the fundamental forces of nature, designed to suspend a subatomic ghost in the dark. To understand the sheer, agonizing fragility of this containment system, we must visualize the invisible architecture of the trap. At its core, the system relies on a massive, supercooled, superconducting electromagnet. This magnet generates a field of invisible, agonizingly intense force, shaping the empty space inside the trap into a strict, unyielding geometric corridor. When the delicate, highly volatile antiprotons are injected into the center of this apparatus, the magnetic field aggressively, violently grips them. Because antiprotons possess a negative electrical charge, the magnetic field lines physically forbid them from moving outward. The fundamental laws of electromagnetism force the antimatter into a frantic, microscopic, perfectly circular orbit. The antiprotons are mathematically pinned to the center of the void, endlessly spiraling in a microscopic dance, completely unable to touch the physical, titanium walls of the cylinder that houses them. But a magnetic field alone is simply an open-ended tube, a corridor without doors. To completely close the invisible cage and prevent the antimatter from simply drifting out of the ends of the magnetic cylinder and violently colliding with the macroscopic world, the scientists at CERN must deploy a second, equally invisible barrier. They introduce a carefully calibrated, perfectly balanced electrical field at both ends of the trap. Because the antiprotons are negatively charged, these precisely tuned electrical electrodes act as repulsive, invisible mirrors. As the spiraling ghost attempts to drift toward the end of the cylinder, the electric field aggressively, violently pushes it back. The antiproton is repelled, sent hurtling back toward the opposite end, only to be violently pushed back again. It is trapped in an endless, agonizing cycle of levitation, bouncing back and forth, spiraling frantically inside a microscopic, invisible holding cell. It is suspended entirely in the dark, touching absolutely nothing, completely isolated from the physical matter of the universe by a fragile, vibrating web of pure human mathematics. However, constructing the invisible walls of the prison is only a fraction of the terrifying thermodynamic tightrope we are walking. The electromagnetic fields can perfectly suspend the antimatter in the center of the trap, but they are completely useless if normal matter is allowed to wander inside. The Earth is a wet, chaotic, heavily contaminated biological sphere. The air in a standard laboratory is a roaring, turbulent ocean of trillions upon trillions of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide molecules, constantly ricocheting and colliding at hundreds of miles per hour. If even one single, stray molecule of normal atmospheric gas were to casually drift into the center of the penning trap, it would instantly strike the levitating antiproton, triggering a microscopic, blinding breach of reality. Therefore, the physical cylinder housing this invisible cage must be violently, aggressively emptied. The scientists must artificially manufacture a vacuum of incomprehensible purity. They use massive industrial pumps to aggressively suck the physical matter out of the chamber, creating an environment that is orders of magnitude emptier and more desolate than the sprawling, freezing void of deep interstellar space. They must scrub the interior of the trap until there is absolutely nothing left, creating a localized, artificial pocket of absolute emptiness right in the middle of the most crowded, matter-dense planet in the known solar system. And still, the unyielding laws of thermodynamics demand an even greater, more terrifying extreme. Even in the most perfect, artificially constructed vacuum, trace amounts of microscopic thermal noise remain. The physical walls of the titanium containment vessel itself are made of atoms, and at room temperature, those atoms are violently vibrating, constantly radiating infrared heat and threatening to destabilize the incredibly delicate electromagnetic fields holding the ghost in place. To ensure the absolute survival of the invisible cage, the entire apparatus must be plunged into the most extreme, paralyzing cold permitted by the laws of physics. The penning trap is aggressively bathed in liquid helium, forcefully driving the temperature of the system down to a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. They must freeze the trap to a temperature colder than the cosmic microwave background radiation, colder than the darkest, most ancient corners of the expanding universe. They must mathematically paralyze the surrounding atoms, stripping away their kinetic energy, entirely suffocating the thermal noise of the macroscopic world to create a tomb of absolute, unyielding stillness. Only in this artificially frozen, aggressively emptied, and electromagnetically locked abyss can the antiproton safely exist without instantly balancing the cosmic equation. This is the extreme, reality-bending engineering required to hold absolute annihilation hostage. We look at this staggeringly complex apparatus and we arrogantly pat ourselves on the back, entirely convinced that we have conquered the fundamental forces of nature. We believe that we have successfully caged the void, demonstrating the supreme dominance of the human intellect over the cold, dead machinery of the cosmos. But this arrogance completely blinds us to the suffocating, existential horror of what we have actually built. We have not conquered the universe. We have merely built an incredibly fragile, desperately precarious thermodynamic dam to hold back an infinite ocean of absolute deletion. The true, paralyzing dread of the magnetic prison lies in its absolute, unyielding dependence on active human infrastructure. The physical walls of a steel vault do not require a power source to remain solid. A glass jar does not need to be plugged into a wall to keep the chemicals inside it from spilling out. But the penning trap is entirely, terrifyingly artificial. The intense magnetic fields holding the ghost in the center of the vacuum are generated by superconducting coils that must be constantly, relentlessly fed with a precise, uninterrupted flow of electricity. The massive cryogenic cooling systems that prevent the trap from boiling over and shattering the vacuum seal require constant mechanical maintenance and a never-ending supply of liquid helium. The invisible walls of this prison are not permanent. They are an active, ongoing process. They exist strictly because we are actively, aggressively forcing them to exist, second by agonizing second. We are suspending the ultimate cosmic eraser in an invisible web of energy, entirely dependent on the incredibly fragile, highly susceptible electrical grids of the macroscopic human world. We are trusting the fundamental integrity of physical reality to the mechanical reliability of a power cable. If a generator stutters, if a cooling valve violently ruptures, or if the electrical current fluctuates for a fraction of a single, unrecordable millisecond, the invisible walls of the prison do not slowly crack. They instantaneously cease to exist. The electromagnetic grip vanishes, the agonizing suspension fails, and the microscopic cloud of absolute negation is violently, uncontrollably dropped directly onto the normal matter of the titanium floor. We are playing God with the ultimate fire, casually balancing the fundamental equation of the universe on a fragile human-made tightrope, completely oblivious to the horrifying reality that we are actively manufacturing the exact conditions required for our own permanent erasure, and trusting a fragile, biological society to simply keep the power running. If we were a rational species, possessing even a fundamental, instinctual respect for the terrifying, reality-breaking laws of the cosmos, the story of our interaction with antimatter would end the exact moment we successfully trapped it. We would look at the miraculous, utterly precarious thermodynamic architecture of the penning trap. We would recognize the absolute, unyielding annihilation suspended within its invisible electromagnetic walls, and we would collectively agree to leave the ghost exactly where it is. Common sense, driven by the primal, biological urge for self-preservation, dictates that when you have managed to build a flawless, super-cooled cage to hold the fundamental negation of your own existence, you bury that cage as deep underground as humanly possible. You isolate it from the chaotic, vibrating noise of the macroscopic world. You pour millions of tons of dense, reinforced concrete over the subterranean bunker. You meticulously maintain the power grid, feeding its superconducting magnets, and you treat the containment zone with the hushed, terrified reverence of a sacred, apocalyptic temple. You do not touch it, you do not breathe on it, and you absolutely, under any conceivable circumstances, do not unplug it and take it for a ride. But human curiosity is a deeply ingrained, fundamentally self-destructive disease. We are completely incapable of leaving the sleeping monsters of the dark alone. We are cursed with a staggering, almost comical level of biological arrogance that blinds us to our own fragility. And it is this exact arrogance that has birthed the most terrifying, absurd, and existentially horrifying logistical operation in the history of human science. As of this exact moment, in the spring of 2026, the orthodox scientific establishment at CERN has decided that simply caging the void in the dark is no longer sufficient. They have grown bored with simply watching the ghost levitate in the basement. They want to use it. They want to weaponize the absolute deletion of the Antiproton to surgically dissect the outer skins of rare, highly unstable radioactive isotopes. To accomplish this incredibly specific, microscopic goal, they have initiated the PUMA project, the Antiproton Unstable Matter Annihilation Experiment. The objective of PUMA is not just to study antimatter, but to actively transport it across the sprawling, terrestrial campus of the CERN facility to a completely different laboratory known as ISOLD. To achieve this unprecedented scientific milestone, they are forced to do the unthinkable. They must intentionally sever the delicate, permanent umbilical cords that connect the penning trap to the massive, stable infrastructure of the subterranean laboratory. They must pull the ultimate cosmic eraser up to the surface, expose it to the chaotic, unpredictable environment of the Earth's atmosphere, and physically move it. We must aggressively break down the sheer, staggering mechanical reality of what is actually happening here. The containment apparatus is not a small, sci-fi glowing vial that a scientist can carefully carry in a reinforced briefcase. It is a massive, incredibly heavy, 1-ton superconducting magnet. It is a hulking, cylindrical beast forged from thick titanium, wrapped in incredibly complex cryogenic cooling lines, and wired with perfectly calibrated, highly sensitive electronics. Deep inside the freezing, pitch-black heart of this 1-ton behemoth, hovering in an artificial vacuum that is purer and colder than the darkest expanses of deep interstellar space, is the payload: 1 billion antiprotons. 1 billion microscopic mathematical triggers for absolute, unyielding erasure, violently spiraling in an invisible cage, desperately waiting for a single, microscopic failure of the magnetic field so they can instantly convert the surrounding matter into a blinding, lethal flash of pure gamma radiation. This is the cargo. It is the most volatile, reality-deleting substance in the known cosmos, fundamentally hostile to the very planet it sits upon, and the method chosen by the greatest scientific minds on Earth to transport this 1-ton apocalypse is not a frictionless magnetic rail system. It is not a hyper-stabilized, vacuum-sealed, subterranean transit tube. It is a truck, a standard, heavy-duty, internal combustion transport truck. Imagine the absolute, paralyzing absurdity of this juxtaposition. Try to force your mind to reconcile the terrifying subatomic physics occurring inside the trap with the crude, mundane, macroscopic reality of the vehicle carrying it. The 1-ton superconducting magnet containing 1 billion perfectly suspended ghosts of antimatter is lifted by a mechanical crane and physically bolted onto the flatbed of a delivery lorry. The human driver climbs into the cabin. The heavy diesel engine turns over, violently shuddering the metal chassis of the vehicle and spewing thick, black, perfectly normal hydrocarbon exhaust into the Swiss air. The transmission engages. The thick rubber tires grip the asphalt, and the apocalypse slowly begins to roll down a regular 2-lane road. Inside the titanium cylinder, the temperature is painstakingly maintained at fractions of a degree above absolute zero, and the antiprotons are locked in a mathematically flawless, desperately fragile electromagnetic dance. Outside the cylinder, the world is a chaotic, wet, vibrating mess. There is wind blowing against the metal hull. There are microscopic variations in the density of the pavement. There is the relentless, mechanical vibration of the diesel engine, the friction of the brake pads, and the shifting weight of the suspension system as the truck slowly navigates the sprawling CERN complex. The trap has been equipped with onboard, portable power supplies and self-contained liquid helium reserves to keep the magnetic walls active and the vacuum completely frozen while it is disconnected from the main grid. But it is now a completely isolated, vulnerable island of preservation bouncing down a human road. The incredibly fragile thermodynamic balance that prevents the universe from violently balancing its equation is now entirely, terrifyingly dependent on the mechanical reliability of a portable generator and the structural integrity of a truck's shock absorbers. This slow, rumbling journey across the asphalt perfectly encapsulates the absolute, terrifying absurdity of the human condition. We are a species of fragile, hallucinating meat machines living on the thin, cooling crust of a dying rock. We are constructed entirely of leftover, illegitimate mathematical garbage from a broken cosmic equation. We are entirely surrounded by a hostile, freezing void that is actively expanding to stretch us into nothingness. Yet, despite our profound, inescapable cosmic insignificance, we possess the staggering audacity to capture the physical manifestation of our own non-existence, load it into the back of a commercial vehicle, and casually drive it past cafeteria buildings, chain-link fences, and employee parking lots. We have domesticated the void, treating the ultimate cosmic eraser as if it were a fragile crate of sensitive laboratory glassware. The psychological horror of the PUMA project does not stem from a sudden, violent explosion. It stems from the suffocating, quiet dread of the mundane. The apocalypse is not being heralded by the majestic sounding of divine trumpets, and it is not raining down as fire from a tearing sky. It is sitting quietly in the back of a slow-moving, diesel-powered transport truck, heavily disguised as a boring piece of industrial machinery. The scientists drinking their morning coffee, the birds resting casually on the telephone wires above the road, the very air swirling around the vehicle, they are all entirely, blissfully oblivious to the fact that absolute, unyielding deletion is passing right by them. They are separated from permanent, mathematical erasure by nothing more than a few inches of supercooled titanium, a vibrating magnetic field powered by a portable battery, and the careful, steady hands of a human driver desperately trying to avoid a speed bump. We spend our lives completely terrified of imaginary monsters, supernatural ghosts, and the grand, dramatic end of the world, completely failing to realize that the true end of the world is a physical, measurable substance. And right now, we are taking it for a ride. We are actively driving the mechanism of our own permanent erasure through the macroscopic illusion of our daily lives, poking the most terrifying, unforgiving monster in the universe with a stick just to see what happens when it collides with a radioactive isotope. The Antimatter truck is a masterpiece of dark comedy and existential dread, a chilling, physical monument to our profound blindness to our own fragility. It proves that human beings do not actually comprehend the horrors we are playing with. Because if we truly understood the unyielding, destructive mathematics of the antiprotons sitting in the back of that truck, we would never have dared to start the engine. We are forced to confront the absolute, staggering fragility of the human illusion when we place the fundamental negation of our own existence onto the back of a commercial transport vehicle and subject it to the chaotic, grinding friction of the macroscopic world. The scientists at CERN have meticulously calculated the magnetic resonance. They have perfectly balanced the artificial vacuum, and they have bathed the entire containment vessel in the paralyzing cold of liquid helium, entirely convinced that their mathematical prowess can tame the apocalyptic nature of the antiproton. But the universe fundamentally despises arrogance, and it absolutely refuses to be tamed by the crude, biological engineering of a temporary species. When the heavy diesel engine of the transport truck rumbles to life and the rubber tires begin to roll across the uneven asphalt of the facility, the absolute safety of the subterranean laboratory is permanently abandoned. The 1-ton superconducting magnet, holding 1 billion microscopic triggers for absolute erasure, is no longer insulated from the violent, unpredictable thermodynamics of the Earth. It is now entirely at the mercy of the mundane. We are trusting the survival of our localized reality to the mechanical integrity of a steel shock absorber, the grip of a tire tread, and the uninterrupted hum of a portable, battery-powered electrical generator. To understand the paralyzing dread of this journey, we must violently zoom in on the incredibly precarious architecture of the invisible prison as it moves through the physical world. The penning trap holding the antimatter does not possess physical walls that can simply dent or bend under pressure. The cage is made entirely of energy, a desperately fragile web of perfectly calibrated electromagnetic fields that requires a constant, flawless, and completely uninterrupted flow of electricity to exist. This electricity is actively flowing through superconducting wires that must be kept at a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. If the temperature of those wires rises by even a single microscopic fraction of a Kelvin, they instantly lose their superconducting properties. The electrical resistance violently spikes, the current catastrophically stutters, and the magnetic field completely collapses. This is the terrifying, invisible tightrope the truck is driving across. The apocalypse is not waiting for a grand, cinematic disaster. It is waiting for a microscopic, completely mundane mechanical failure. Imagine the incredibly chaotic, violent environment of the road from the perspective of the subatomic ghost suspended inside the trap. Every single imperfection in the pavement, every microscopic pebble crushed beneath the heavy tires, sends a jarring kinetic shockwave violently propagating upward through the steel chassis of the truck. The mechanical suspension system desperately tries to dampen the kinetic energy, but the macroscopic world is a roaring ocean of vibration. The titanium hull of the containment vessel shudders, The cryogenic cooling lines, desperately pumping the liquid helium to maintain the absolute zero temperature, are subjected to the relentless, grinding stress of physical movement. We are casually bouncing a perfectly frozen, mathematically flawless subatomic cage through an environment fundamentally governed by friction, heat, and chaotic collisions. The ultimate existential nightmare begins in the unrecordable, agonizing fraction of a single millisecond when the human machinery finally fails. It does not require a dramatic crash or a massive explosion to trigger the end. It only requires a microscopic breach in the illusion of control. Perhaps a heavy bump in the road violently jolts the containment vessel, causing a microscopic, invisible hairline fracture in one of the highly pressurized cryogenic seals. Perhaps the violent vibration of the diesel engine temporarily loosens a grounding wire on the portable power supply. Or perhaps the chaotic thermal noise of the outside air manages to bleed through the outer insulation, raising the internal temperature of the superconducting coils by a billionth of a degree. The specific, mundane catalyst of the failure is entirely irrelevant, because the mathematical consequence is instantaneous and absolute. In that exact, terrifying microsecond of mechanical stutter, the portable generator falters. The flawless, perfectly calibrated electrical current desperately feeding the superconducting magnets drops. Because the electromagnetic cage is an active, ongoing process that requires constant energy to manifest, the drop in power does not cause the prison to slowly degrade or crack. It causes the prison to instantaneously, mathematically, cease to exist. The intense, invisible magnetic walls that were aggressively gripping the billion antiprotons, forcing them into a tight, suspended, perfectly circular orbit in the center of the vacuum, simply vanish into the dark. The precise electrical fields at the ends of the cylinder, acting as invisible mirrors to repel the antimatter, instantly power down. The absolute, unyielding grip of human engineering completely evaporates. Inside the freezing, pitch-black heart of the artificial vacuum chamber, the ghosts are suddenly, violently untethered. For a fraction of a millisecond, the billion antiprotons are no longer mathematically pinned to the center of the void. They are entirely free. Released from their agonizing forced suspension, the microscopic cloud of absolute negation begins to drift outward, propelled by the chaotic, residual momentum of their collapsed orbit. There are no alarm bells ringing in the subatomic dark. There is no desperate screaming, no flashing warning lights, and no frantic biological panic. There is only the cold, silent, and mathematically inevitable drift of the antimatter cloud moving relentlessly toward the physical titanium walls of the containment cylinder. We must aggressively draw a line between the horror of this specific failure and the macroscopic accidents we are biologically conditioned to fear. When a tanker truck carrying thousands of gallons of highly flammable gasoline overturns on a highway and violently ignites, it is a localized, chaotic tragedy. The intense heat violently breaks the chemical bonds of the hydrocarbons, releasing massive amounts of kinetic energy, shattering windows, melting steel, and burning the flesh of anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in the blast radius. But despite the breathtaking violence of a chemical explosion, the fundamental fabric of reality remains completely intact. The carbon atoms, the hydrogen atoms, and the oxygen atoms are not destroyed. They are simply violently rearranged into smoke, ash, and invisible gases. Even a catastrophic failure at a nuclear power plant, where heavy, unstable uranium atoms violently split apart in a runaway chain reaction, is merely a rearrangement of the cosmic furniture. The physical building blocks of the universe survive the disaster. But the collapse of the penning trap on the back of the transport truck is absolutely not a chemical or a nuclear accident. It is a fundamental, structural breach of reality itself. When the drifting cloud of untethered antiprotons finally reaches the edge of the artificial vacuum and makes physical contact with the inner wall of the containment vessel, they are not colliding with a chemical reactant. They are physically colliding with the fundamental anchor of our existence. They are touching the normal matter of the titanium atoms. In this exact, agonizing microsecond, the universe violently, mercilessly recognizes the presence of the anomaly. The incredibly fragile, temporary exception of physical matter is brought face to face with its perfect, unyielding mathematical negation. The microscopic impact of the antiproton against the titanium wall does not trigger a spark, nor does it initiate a burn. It triggers the absolute, unbreakable law of cosmic symmetry. The subatomic quarks inside the titanium nucleus and the antiquarks inside the wandering antiprotons instantly perfectly recognize their opposite. The mathematical equation of the cosmos, which had been artificially held apart by the arrogant, desperate machinery of the human trap, violently snaps shut to correct the error. In an instant of incomprehensible, reality-breaking violence, the physical structure of both the titanium atoms and the antimatter cloud is permanently, irreversibly unwritten from the ledger of the universe. The atomic architecture that provided the illusion of a solid wall is completely eradicated. The containment vessel does not simply rupture or melt. The very concept of its physical existence is mathematically deleted from the geometry of space-time. We are completely, horrifyingly blind to the reality that we are not driving a bomb down the street. We are driving a localized, structural collapse of the universe, desperately praying that a rubber tire and a portable battery can successfully prevent the void from violently and permanently balancing its own equation. Human beings have developed an incredibly limited, profoundly comforting, and entirely macroscopic understanding of destruction. From the very moment our ancient ancestors first harnessed the chaotic heat of a campfire, we have been biologically conditioned to believe that we understand how things end. When we witness a raging forest fire turning towering, ancient pines into grey, crumbling ash, or when we watch a massive, heavily engineered skyscraper violently collapse into a tangled heap of shattered steel and pulverized concrete, we arrogantly believe we are watching physical matter being destroyed. But this is a profound biological delusion. In the realm of classical physics, in the mundane, everyday world that our sensory organs are capable of perceiving, absolutely nothing is ever truly destroyed. Chemistry is merely the chaotic art of rearrangement. The carbon atoms in a burning log are not ceasing to exist. They are simply breaking their fragile chemical bonds with hydrogen and oxygen, violently releasing stored solar energy as heat and visible light, and floating away into the atmosphere as invisible, buoyant gas. The fundamental building blocks of reality, the microscopic protons, the neutrons, and the swirling electrons remain entirely, perfectly intact. Even in the terrifying, blinding heart of a detonating thermonuclear weapon, which represents the most violent, apocalyptic, macroscopic event our primitive species has ever managed to engineer, we absolutely do not destroy matter. We simply force heavy uranium atoms to violently split in half, or we force incredibly light hydrogen atoms to fuse together under crushing pressure. In a nuclear blast, only a microscopic, practically negligible fraction of 1% of the actual physical mass is converted into energy. The vast majority of the bomb, and the city it subsequently vaporizes, is simply violently scattered as highly radioactive debris. Our entire conceptual framework of mortality, our primal fear of physical trauma, and our deeply entrenched religious narratives are all built upon the comforting assumption that our bodies will eventually break, rot, and simply rearrange into the soil. We find a quiet, desperate, and pathetic solace in the idea that our atoms will somehow survive us. But the horrific, supercooled cargo currently bouncing along the asphalt inside CERN's transport truck does not deal in the comforting physics of rearrangement. It deals in absolute, unyielding mathematical deletion. To comprehend the ultimate, paralyzing terror of the antimatter breach, we must aggressively slow down time to the exact, excruciating microsecond that the artificial, electromagnetic prison completely fails. When the power supply stutters, the invisible magnetic walls holding the billion antiprotons violently collapse. The microscopic cloud of absolute negation is no longer suspended in the freezing, artificial vacuum. It drifts outward, crossing the microscopic chasm of empty space, and makes direct, physical contact with the inner titanium wall of the containment vessel. This is the precise, agonizing moment the universe finally recognizes the anomaly. An antiproton does not bounce off a normal titanium atom. It does not chemically react with it, and it does not simply break its molecular bonds. As the heavy, negatively charged antiproton sinks through the swirling electron cloud of the titanium atom and collides directly with its positively charged nucleus, a fundamental, reality-breaking structural paradox is triggered. The subatomic quarks that constitute the normal matter of our world are brought face to face with their exact, perfectly mirrored antiquark counterparts. What follows is not an explosion in any sense that a human brain can intuitively or biologically understand. It is the immediate, ruthless, and merciless enforcement of the universe's most unbreakable law of cosmic symmetry. The grand cosmic ledger, which had been artificially and arrogantly propped open by the desperate machinery of human engineering, violently snaps shut to balance the equation to zero. At the exact, unrecordable moment of contact, both the normal matter of the titanium wall and the antimatter of the escaped cloud completely cease to possess the physical property of mass. They achieve 100% absolute mass-to-energy conversion. The incredibly dense, complex atomic architecture that gave the titanium metal its solid, unyielding physical properties is instantaneously, mathematically unwritten from the fabric of space-time. It is a process of sheer, terrifying, and completely flawless efficiency. There is no leftover debris, there is no shattered shrapnel, and there is absolutely no ash. There is no physical evidence that the atoms ever occupied that localized coordinate in the void. The matter is permanently, structurally subtracted from physical reality. Because the fundamental, unbreakable law of conservation explicitly dictates that the massive amount of energy holding that atomic structure together cannot simply vanish into nothingness, the physical deletion of the matter instantly triggers the birth of pure, unadulterated, and blindingly violent light. But this is not the warm, comforting, visible light of a burning star. The entire combined physical mass of the annihilated particles is instantly converted into an overwhelmingly lethal, invisible flash of high-frequency gamma radiation. These gamma rays are the most energetic, violent, and destructive photons in the known cosmos. They carry so much raw, concentrated, reality-tearing power that they easily rip right through solid steel, violently tear apart the molecular bonds of the surrounding atmospheric gases, and aggressively shred the delicate, heavily entangled DNA of any biological organism unfortunate enough to be standing in the immediate vicinity. The titanium wall of the trap does not melt, and it does not shatter outward like a conventional bomb casing. It is replaced in a fraction of a millisecond by a roaring, expanding sphere of invisible, radioactive death, born directly from the permanent mathematical erasure of physical matter. Now, you must force yourself to imagine the paralyzing, existential horror of this structural breach expanding beyond the titanium walls of the containment vessel, violently reaching the chaotic, wet biological machinery of a living human being. Imagine a microscopic fraction of this escaping antimatter cloud, just a few million stray antiprotons drifting through the shattered vacuum seal and coming into direct, physical contact with your human skin. We are biologically and psychologically conditioned to fear fire, to fear the sharp tearing of our flesh, and to fear the slow, suffocating cessation of our heartbeat. But Annihilation completely and terrifyingly bypasses the macroscopic biological mechanisms of pain, injury, and disease. If an antiproton touches the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms that make up your nervous system, you do not burn to death. You do not bleed out on the pavement. You do not slowly, agonizingly decay into the earth. The physical architecture that serves as the localized anchor for your conscious ego is violently, mathematically unwritten. The atoms that currently hold your most cherished, deeply ingrained memories, the incredibly complex, vibrating quantum structure of your brain that desperately clings to the hallucination of your own individuality, are instantly subjected to the absolute mirror of the cosmos. Your matter is literally cancelled out. The very substance of your physical being, the biological illusion you have spent decades carefully cultivating and protecting, is instantly converted into a blinding burst of pure gamma radiation. You do not leave a physical corpse behind for your loved ones to weep over and bury in the dirt. You do not return to the earth as a collection of recycled, decaying atoms. You are entirely, structurally, and permanently removed from the universe. This is the ultimate, inescapable death, and it is the most terrifying reality the cosmos has to offer. When you die a standard, biological death, the meat machine simply fails. Your quantum information scatters, your ego is shredded by thermal decoherence, and your atoms are eventually blindly recycled by the thermodynamic engine of the planet to build new, hallucinating biological prisons. Your physical material remains trapped in the unyielding cycle of the universe. But when you are touched by the void, when you are subjected to the horrifying physics of absolute erasure, the universe is aggressively correcting the microscopic, mathematical rounding error that allowed you to exist in the first place. You are not broken down, you are deleted. You are fundamentally transformed from a complex, desperately thinking biological organism into a fleeting, invisible wave of lethal radiation, speeding away into the freezing dark at the absolute speed of light. You leave behind absolutely nothing but the terrifying mathematical realization that your physical existence, your consciousness, and the entire macroscopic world you inhabited were never anything more than a fragile, temporary mistake waiting to be permanently, violently corrected by the cold, unyielding mechanics of absolute annihilation. When we strip away the blinding, chaotic terror of the transport itself, when we momentarily look past the staggering mechanical absurdity of a heavy diesel truck carrying the fundamental, mathematical negation of our own existence down a paved human road, we are violently forced to confront the ultimate, paralyzing question: why? What possible, conceivable motivation could drive a species of highly vulnerable, easily shredded biological organisms to take such an apocalyptic risk? The logical, preservation-driven architecture of the primitive human brain assumes that if we are willing to artificially summon the ultimate cosmic eraser from the freezing dark, cage it in an invisible web of desperately fragile electromagnetic energy, and parade it through the macroscopic world, the reward must be of unparalleled, world-altering magnitude. We desperately want to believe that this terrifying logistical nightmare is the necessary precursor to unlocking unlimited, pristine energy for a dying planet, or that it is the vital key to discovering the absolute, mythical secret of biological immortality. We need the justification to match the sheer, reality-breaking scale of the danger. But the cold, unyielding truth of the PUMA project completely shatters this comforting assumption, exposing a level of existential hubris that is infinitely more horrifying than the antimatter itself. We are not risking the structural integrity of our localized reality to save the world. We are risking absolute, instantaneous erasure simply to satisfy an obsessive, microscopic, and entirely academic curiosity. We are driving a billion triggers of unyielding annihilation across a facility just so we can lightly brush them against the fragile, deformed skin of dying atomic mutants. To comprehend the absolute, staggering arrogance of the observer, we must plunge back down into the suffocating, claustrophobic abyss of the subatomic realm and examine the exact, microscopic targets of this unprecedented experiment. At the Isolde facility, the destination of the antimatter truck, scientists are not studying the stable, permanent building blocks of our physical reality. They are not interested in the reliable, perfectly balanced carbon or oxygen atoms that securely anchor your biological flesh to the universe. Instead, they are aggressively manufacturing incredibly rare, highly unstable, and heavily deformed radioactive isotopes. These are the freaks of the quantum world. In the normal, stable architecture of an atomic nucleus, the positively charged protons and the neutral neutrons are tightly, mathematically bound together in a dense, compact core. But these artificially generated isotopes, like lithium-1,1, are entirely fundamentally broken. They contain too many neutrons, causing their atomic structure to grotesquely bloat and distend. The nucleus cannot hold its shape, forcing the excess neutrons to desperately orbit the core at massive, unnatural distances, creating a diffuse, ghost-like halo around the dying atom. Because they are so fundamentally flawed, so mathematically offensive to the unyielding laws of quantum stability, the universe absolutely refuses to let them exist. They are brutally, mercilessly torn apart by radioactive decay in a fraction of a single millisecond. They are born dying. And it is here, in the fleeting, unrecordable microsecond of these deformed atoms' agonizingly short lives that the peak of human biological arrogance fully manifests. The orthodox scientific establishment is not satisfied with merely knowing that these bizarre, dying atomic structures exist. They possess a relentless, insatiable, and entirely self-destructive compulsion to measure them. They want to map the exact microscopic geometry of that diffuse neutron halo. They want to measure the precise thickness of the skin of an atomic nucleus that is mathematically guaranteed to violently cease existing almost the exact instant it is created. But because these radioactive isotopes are so incredibly fragile and short-lived, you cannot measure them with traditional macroscopic instruments. You cannot bounce a photon off them, and you cannot probe them with standard, classical physics. To measure the absolute edge of a dying quantum ghost, you need an instrument of unimaginable, ruthless precision. You need a tool that interacts exclusively and definitively with the outermost layer of the atomic structure. And the tool the scientists at CERN have arrogantly chosen to wield is the Antiproton. The objective of the entire terrifying journey of the containment truck is to bring the caged antimatter to the radioactive isotopes, carefully open a microscopic, highly controlled window in the penning trap, and intentionally allow the drifting, freezing cloud of absolute negation to slowly bleed out toward the deformed atoms. They are explicitly, deliberately orchestrating the exact scenario that we have established as the ultimate cosmic nightmare. They are using absolute, unyielding annihilation as a microscopic measuring tape. As the negatively charged antiprotons slowly drift toward the positively charged nucleus of the radioactive isotope, they are mathematically destined to violently collide with the very first piece of normal matter they encounter. Because the bloated, unstable neutron halo forms the absolute outermost skin of the deformed atom, the antiproton touches the halo first. In that exact, infinitesimal fraction of a second, the universe snaps shut. The antiproton and a single neutron from the radioactive halo instantly, perfectly recognize their mathematical opposition, violently unwriting each other from the ledger of the cosmos in a blinding, localized flash of pure gamma radiation. The scientists then sit safely behind their massive walls of dense lead and heavily reinforced concrete, meticulously recording the exact trajectory and energy signature of the radioactive debris produced by the Erasure, using the ashes of a reality-breaking breach to calculate the density of an atom that no longer exists. This is the profound, suffocating horror of our scientific methodology. We are treating the fundamental, apocalyptic negation of the physical universe as if it were a disposable, microscopic scalpel. We are so entirely blinded by our own relentless drive to map, categorize, and conquer every single hidden corner of the cosmos that we have completely lost our primal, instinctual fear of the dark. We are a species of fragile, hallucinating meat machines, clinging desperately to the incredibly thin, cooling crust of a tiny, insignificant rock, floating helplessly in a massive, expanding void that fundamentally despises our existence. We are constructed entirely from the leftover, illegitimate mathematical garbage of a broken cosmic equation. Our bodies are constantly decaying. Our egos are highly susceptible to the slightest thermodynamic disruption, and our entire macroscopic reality hangs precariously by a microscopic electromagnetic thread. Yet, despite this overwhelming, undeniable physical fragility, We arrogantly posture ourselves as the undisputed masters of the quantum realm. We look at the absolute limits of physical reality, the terrifying threshold where matter and antimatter violently cancel each other out, and we do not see a boundary that should be respected. We see a toy. We see an instrument to be packaged, transported, and casually utilized to satisfy an academic itch. The sheer disproportion of the risk compared to the reward is mathematically paralyzing. We are placing the structural integrity of our localized environment, the very survival of the atomic architecture that anchors our biological consciousness, onto the vibrating, chaotic flatbed of a diesel truck, solely to peek a fraction of a femtometer deeper into the quantum abyss. We are willingly inviting the cosmic executioner into our incredibly fragile, temporary home, carefully unlocking its cage and trusting our crude, biological reflexes and artificial magnetic fields to keep the monster on a tight leash. We are completely, terrifyingly blind to the reality that we are not the masters of the phenomena we observe. We are merely temporary, localized disturbances in a vast, cold machinery that is entirely indifferent to our obsessive curiosity. The universe does not care that we want to understand the neutron halo of a radioactive isotope. The universe only knows that a negative integer has been brought into close proximity with a positive integer, and its only unyielding mathematical imperative is to violently reduce both of them to zero. We spend our incredibly brief, fleeting lives desperately constructing the illusion of control, building sprawling scientific facilities and writing complex mathematical equations to convince ourselves that we have tamed the fundamental forces of nature. But the arrogance of the observer is the ultimate, fatal flaw of the human condition. We are so fiercely obsessed with looking deeper into the abyss that we completely fail to realize we are actively dismantling the very ground we are standing on to get a better view. We are poking a sleeping, reality-shattering monster with a fragile biological stick, entirely oblivious to the terrifying truth that when you casually manipulate the absolute deletion of reality to satisfy your endless, microscopic curiosity, you are inevitably, mathematically begging the void to look back at you, and the void does not observe it, only erases. We have spent our time meticulously analyzing the staggering, mechanical absurdity of a heavy diesel truck transporting the fundamental, mathematical negation of our own existence down a paved human road, but to truly grasp the suffocating, paralyzing weight of this event, we must look beyond the titanium walls of the containment vessel. When we step back and watch the PUMA project slowly navigate the sprawling, terrestrial campus of the CERN facility, we are not merely observing a highly dangerous, unprecedented logistical operation. We are bearing witness to the most perfect, terrifying, and mathematically precise metaphor for the human condition that our fragile species has ever inadvertently constructed. The antimatter truck is not just a scientific endeavor, it is a microscopic, physical manifestation of our actual, terrifying place in the grand architecture of the cosmos. We look at the 1-ton titanium cylinder strapped to the flatbed, and we instinctively feel a profound, suffocating sense of dread at the sheer fragility of the electromagnetic prison holding back the ghost of antiprotons. We are paralyzed by the realization that a single stutter of a portable battery, a microscopic fracture in a vacuum seal, or a momentary lapse in the liquid helium cooling system will instantly, violently unwrite the surrounding reality in a blinding flash of gamma radiation. But the ultimate reality-breaking horror lies in the absolute truth that you do not need to be standing next to the antimatter truck to be subjected to this exact, unyielding level of existential precariousness. You are already riding inside the trap. The terrifying, incredibly fragile, thermodynamic balancing act occurring inside that titanium cylinder is exactly, flawlessly mirroring the staggering, macroscopic absurdity of your own biological existence on this dying rock. To truly comprehend the paralyzing nature of this cosmic metaphor, we must aggressively shatter the comforting, biological illusion of safety that you have draped over the physical world. You walk outside, you feel the warm, gentle breeze against your face. You look up at the expansive, beautifully scattered blue sky, and you arrogantly, inherently assume that the earth is a permanent, peaceful sanctuary. You believe that the biosphere is a default, stable condition of the universe, a secure, heavily fortified castle floating serenely through a quiet, empty void. But the cosmos is absolutely not quiet, and it is most certainly not peaceful. Just as the microscopic cloud of antiprotons inside the penning trap is entirely surrounded by the hostile, unyielding normal matter of the titanium walls that desperately want to mathematically delete it from existence, our entire planet is completely, claustrophobically surrounded by an apocalyptic, freezing void that is actively, continuously trying to crush and sterilize us. The space immediately outside our thin atmospheric envelope is a roaring, turbulent ocean of unimaginable, lethal violence. The sun, which we primitive, hallucinating meat machines worship as a benevolent, life-giving deity, is actually a monstrous, uncontained thermonuclear furnace that relentlessly bombards our planet with a blistering, highly radioactive solar wind. The interstellar medium is a chaotic shooting gallery of high-energy cosmic rays, subatomic shrapnel traveling at a fraction of a percent below the absolute speed of light, capable of violently tearing apart the delicate, heavily entangled DNA of any biological organism they strike. The universe is a hostile, crushing, radioactive wasteland, and the raw, unedited baseline environment of our solar system is absolute, unyielding death. The only reason you are currently capable of drawing a breath, the only reason your biological cells are not instantly boiling away in the freezing vacuum or being violently shredded by cosmic radiation, is because you, exactly like the billion antiprotons suspended in the dark of the CERN transport truck, are actively, desperately being shielded by an invisible, highly temporary electromagnetic cage. Deep beneath the crust of the Earth, thousands of miles below the solid ground you arrogantly trust, lies a massive, violently churning ocean of superheated, liquid iron. As this incredibly heavy, molten metal relentlessly flows and convects around the solid inner core of the planet, it acts as a colossal, planetary-scale dynamo. It generates a massive, invisible magnetic field that violently erupts from the poles and completely encases the Earth in a sprawling, protective, electromagnetic bubble known as the magnetosphere. This invisible force field is the only physical barrier standing between the fragile, biological hallucination of your daily life and the roaring, apocalyptic fury of the cosmos. As the lethal, highly charged particles of the solar wind violently crash into the Earth, the magnetosphere aggressively deflects them, forcing the deadly radiation to slide harmlessly around the planet and drift away into the freezing dark. But just like the penning trap sitting on the back of the transport truck. The Earth's magnetic shield is absolutely not a permanent, physical wall. It is an active, ongoing, and incredibly precarious thermodynamic process. It exists strictly because the internal, mechanical engine of the planet is currently actively running. It is entirely dependent on the continuous, uninterrupted churning of the liquid iron core, just as the trap's invisible walls are entirely dependent on the uninterrupted flow of electricity from the portable generator. And the terrifying, unyielding reality of thermodynamics explicitly dictates that no mechanical engine can run forever. The Earth's core is slowly, mathematically cooling down. The violent convection of the liquid iron is losing its thermodynamic momentum, and just as the portable battery on the back of the CERN truck will eventually, inevitably run out of chemical energy, causing the superconducting magnets to violently collapse, the internal dynamo of our planet will eventually stutter and fail. The magnetic shield will drop. The invisible walls of our planetary prison will evaporate into the dark, and the blinding, radioactive fury of the hostile void will violently, mercilessly wash over the surface of the Earth, permanently stripping away the atmosphere and mathematically unwriting the biological anomaly of human existence. We are living every single second of our incredibly brief, fleeting lives under the ultimate cosmic sword of Damocles. In the ancient, classical parable, the tyrant Dionysius forces his subject, Damocles, to sit on a grand, opulent throne and enjoy a magnificent, decadent feast, but he suspends a massive, razor-sharp sword directly above Damocles' head, held back by nothing more than a single, fragile hair from a horse's tail. The terror of the story is not that the sword falls. The true, paralyzing psychological horror is the agonizing realization that the feast is a complete, absurd illusion, and that absolute, inescapable death is constantly, silently hovering just inches away, entirely dependent on the structural integrity of a microscopic thread. This is exactly, precisely, the unyielding mathematical reality of the human condition. We build our towering cities, we obsess over our trivial, macroscopic conflicts, we desperately seek validation for our fragile egos, and we sit comfortably at the grand feast of biological existence, completely, terrifyingly blind to the razor-sharp, cosmic sword suspended directly over our heads. We are entirely surrounded by a universe that fundamentally despises our anomalous existence, and we are held back from absolute deletion by nothing more than the temporary, vibrating hum of invisible magnetic fields. The journey of the antimatter truck across the asphalt of the CERN facility is the exact, microscopic equivalent of the Earth's journey through the Milky Way galaxy. The truck is a localized, highly pressurized storm of technological arrogance, violently rolling through a macroscopic world that it fundamentally does not belong in, completely oblivious to the fact that the invisible cage holding back the abyss could fail at any unrecordable microsecond. And we are exactly the same. We are a fragile, hallucinating biological anomaly, a microscopic mistake of the Big Bang, hurtling blindly through a cold, expanding, and incredibly hostile void. We are not the permanent, intended masters of this physical reality. We are temporary, unauthorized passengers riding inside an invisible, thermodynamic bubble, desperately, pathetically hoping that the generator holds out for just one more day. We are living entirely on borrowed time, constructed from borrowed, illegitimate mathematical materials, sustained by a fragile, temporary shield that the universe is relentlessly, patiently waiting to dismantle. The true existential dread is the agonizing realization that whether it is a microscopic cloud of antiprotons violently breaching a titanium wall, or the lethal radiation of a dying star violently breaching the Earth's cooling atmosphere, the unyielding mathematics of the cosmos will eventually, inevitably balance the equation, and the protective illusion of the cage will permanently, silently collapse into the dark. As the heavy, diesel-powered transport truck slowly, methodically rolls to a complete, shuddering halt at the heavily fortified receiving bay of the Isolde facility, and the massive, 1-ton superconducting magnet is carefully unbolted from the flatbed to be dragged into the subterranean laboratory, the immediate, localized crisis of the PUMA project is temporarily averted. The portable generator did not violently stutter. The cryogenic liquid helium lines did not catastrophically fracture under the chaotic, grinding friction of the asphalt. The invisible, desperately fragile electromagnetic walls of the penning trap successfully held the microscopic cloud of unyielding, absolute negation perfectly suspended in the freezing dark, preventing the universe from violently and permanently balancing its equation in a blinding, lethal flash of pure gamma radiation. The scientists will breathe a collective, heavily relieved sigh, arrogantly patting themselves on the back for having successfully domesticated the fundamental eraser of the cosmos. They will carefully connect the trap to the permanent power grid, deliberately open the microscopic gates of the prison, and casually use the physical manifestation of absolute nothingness to surgically dissect the deformed skins of dying, radioactive isotopes. They will celebrate this terrifying logistical nightmare as a triumphant historic milestone of human engineering. But when we forcefully strip away the blinding, congratulatory hubris of the orthodox scientific establishment, and we stare directly into the cold, unyielding mathematical reality of what has just occurred, we are left with a profoundly suffocating, inescapable, existential dread. The safe arrival of the antimatter truck is not a victory. It is a chilling, physical monument to the absolute, staggering absurdity of the human condition, and a terrifying reminder of the ultimate fragility of our localized reality. To truly digest the paralyzing horror of this journey, we must violently, completely abandon the deeply entrenched, comforting biological delusion that the physical world is a permanent, intended structure. We look around at the sprawling, majestic architecture of the natural world, the towering, ancient mountain ranges, the deep, churning oceans, and the heavily entangled, incredibly complex biological machinery of our own hallucinating bodies, and we instinctively, arrogantly assume that matter is the default state of the universe. We treat the existence of solid ground as a fundamental right, an unshakable, eternal baseline of the cosmos. But the dark, silent payload resting inside the titanium belly of that CERN transport truck explicitly, mathematically proves that matter is absolutely not the default state of the universe. Matter is a highly unstable, temporary, and entirely illegitimate exception. The universe was fundamentally, structurally designed to be a sprawling, beautifully perfect, and completely sterile sea of cold, passive radiation. The flawless, unyielding laws of cosmic symmetry demanded that the Big Bang produce exactly equal amounts of normal matter and antimatter, ensuring an immediate, violent war of absolute annihilation that should have left the cosmos completely devoid of atomic structure. The void was mathematically supposed to be perfectly, eternally empty. The only reason the Earth exists, the only reason the heavy carbon and oxygen atoms currently anchoring your conscious ego to the physical world are allowed to temporarily vibrate in the dark, is because of a microscopic, inexplicable mathematical rounding error 14 billion years ago. We are the leftover, unaccounted for debris of a broken equation. We are a glaring, physical violation of the intended cosmic order. We are a highly localized, fiercely artificial thermodynamic glitch wandering blindly through an expanding, freezing universe that fundamentally despises anomalies. The cosmos does not want us here. The unyielding laws of physics are constantly, relentlessly grinding away at the fragile bonds of our atomic structure, desperately trying to return the universe to a state of cold, empty equilibrium. The existence of the antiproton, the exact, flawless mirror image of our reality, possessing a reversed electrical charge and a blind, mathematical hatred for our physical architecture, is the ultimate proof that the universe possesses a built-in, unyielding mechanism for permanent deletion. Antimatter is not a science fiction weapon. It is the cosmic executioner, the exact mathematical integer required to reduce our illegitimate existence back to absolute zero. When the scientists at CERN intentionally manufacture this negation, trap it in an invisible web of human electricity, and casually drive it through the macroscopic world, they are not just conducting an experiment. They are bringing the universe's ultimate correction mechanism face to face with the mistake it has been trying to erase since the dawn of time. The antimatter truck is a chilling, perfectly concentrated reminder of exactly how easily our temporary exception can be permanently, violently erased. It proves that it does not require a massive, catastrophic asteroid impact or the slow, agonizing death of the sun to unwrite the human narrative. The absolute destruction of our physical reality is not a grand, dramatic, cinematic event. It is a microscopic, incredibly mundane mathematical transaction. It only requires a single, negatively charged ghost to physically touch the electron cloud of a normal atom, and the atomic architecture that provides the comforting illusion of a solid wall, a breathing lung, or a thinking brain is instantaneously, flawlessly subtracted from the fabric of space-time. The terrifying ease of this deletion, the fact that absolute erasure is constantly hovering just a fraction of a millisecond away from the failure of a portable battery, completely shatters the arrogant, biological hallucination of our own permanence. We spend our entire, incredibly brief biological lives paralyzed by the mundane anxieties of a completely fabricated macroscopic reality. We obsess over the accumulation of imaginary, digitized wealth. We build towering psychological fortresses to desperately defend our fragile, hallucinating egos against the perceived judgments of other temporary, dying meat machines. We aggressively plan for a future, decades down the line, deeply terrified of the biological decay of our own bodies, completely failing to realize that the very concept of a future inherently requires a stable, permanent physical stage upon which to unfold. We worry about everything, completely blind to the fact that there is absolutely nothing to worry about, because nothing is actually real in the way we desperately need it to be. Our physical reality, the heavy, dense, comforting world we blindly trust every single time we take a step, is a mathematical anomaly, constantly, terrifyingly hanging by a microscopic, electromagnetic thread. We are suspending our entire existence over a roaring, apocalyptic abyss of absolute deletion, trusting our survival to the vibrating hum of invisible magnetic fields and the incredibly precarious, highly susceptible machinery of a cooling planet. The journey of the void across the asphalt of the CERN facility forces us to confront the agonizing truth that we are not the masters of the physical universe, and we are absolutely not the intended culmination of a grand, cosmic design. We are temporary, unauthorized passengers riding inside an incredibly fragile thermodynamic bubble, aggressively poking the sleeping monsters of the dark with a stick, entirely oblivious to the terrifying reality that the cage is not permanent. The universe is a blind, roaring engine of unyielding mathematics, and it will eventually, inevitably balance its equation. The protective illusion of the magnetic trap will drop. The invisible walls of our planetary shield will evaporate into the freezing dark, and the fundamental negation of our existence will violently, mercilessly wash over the anomaly of our physical matter, permanently erasing the glitch and returning the cosmos to its intended, beautifully perfect, and completely empty state. We are living on borrowed time, constructed from borrowed, illegitimate materials, constantly surrounded by a universe that is simply, patiently waiting to permanently zero out the account. Does the reality of transporting absolute annihilation fascinate you, or does it expose the terrifying fragility of your own existence? Let's discuss the antimatter asymmetry below. Good night, and I will see you in the next video here at Still Science Lab.